Hello and welcome to Let's Talk. Will the New Zealand rugby sides go undefeated against overseas opposition this weekend? I know the title's a bit shorter than that, but that's basically what I'm going to be talking about. I'm Paul, the guy behind Driving More, and thank you very much for joining me. It was in the papers this week that in New Zealand that they were considering could the New Zealand sides go undefeated against overseas opposition. And this season, the Blues have stepped up, so they are a much more difficult proposition, and we do have 5 competitive sides rather than just the 4 with one other that we've had in previous seasons. So first up, let's just look at who they are playing against, because the way that the Super Rugby is set up currently is that New Zealand will play the Australian sides and one of the 2 African conferences. So last year they played Africa 2 conference. So this year they're playing Africa 1 conference. So let's just run through those 9 teams and let's see who we think could possibly beat a New Zealand side. If we run through the Africa conference first, we have the Stormers, who are having a decent season. So they definitely, who top the group, and they definitely can upset or beat one of the New Zealand sides. The Cheetahs, well, they're much improved. They are the Currie Cup champions. They went undefeated in the Currie Cup last year, but really, at this stage, I think they're not quite up to it, and so I won't bother looking at their fixtures and seeing whether they could do it. The Bulls, I saw the Bulls in the flesh recently, and they are a very limited side. And there's no way I can see them beating a New Zealand side, and so we'll discount those. And then the Sunwolves, clearly they're going to lose all their games against New Zealand sides. So what I'm going to do, for the sides that we think are competitive and could beat New Zealand sides, I'm going to run through their fixtures against the Kiwi sides, and we'll see where we could see the upsets, or where we could see, the New Zealand sides tripping up. Not that it wouldn't necessarily be an upset. So yeah, as I say, I think really the Stormers are the only side out of the Africa 1 conference that we could see winning one of those games. If we switch over to the Australian conference, the Brumbies top that conference and are clearly at the moment the best side in that group. We have, I thought they would be rebuilding this year, but they have managed to put it together. The Waratahs, now everyone fancied them to top the group, so we've got to consider them as well, and we'll have to go through their games and see where they're matching up against New Zealand sides. And the Reds, well, the Reds on paper have the side to do it, even if they haven't been putting the actual results together. So again, we'll have a look at those and see if they have a game later in the season at home that they could win. The Force and the Rebels, I'm sorry, but no, they just don't have the personnel to beat a New Zealand side, so we're not going to consider those ones. So let's kick off with the Australian sides, and let's start with the Brumbies and see what fixtures they've got against New Zealand sides coming up. So on the, oops, sorry, it's scrolling too fast for me. The next game against New Zealand opposition is against the Hurricanes, but it's in Wellington, and against the defending champions in Wellington. Sorry, but I really can't see that being one that that the New Zealand side will lose. The following weekend, though, they get to host the Blues, so that's the 30th of April, and you've got to say, at home against the Blues, they should be in with a shout of a win. So immediately we've got a game there where we've got the top of the conference from the Brumbies against one of the lower 2 teams in the New Zealand conference, and you've got to say that would possibly be one of those games that they could upset. So let's just chalk that one up. The only other game that they have is against the Chiefs on the final round of the competition in Hamilton. So if the Chiefs had already wrapped up first place, which you wouldn't think they would be able to do, you think it's going to be pretty tight in the New Zealand conference, then possibly you could see a weakened side against the Brumbies. Otherwise, in all honesty, I can't see the Brumbies turning over the Chiefs at home. Next up in the table is the Waratahs. So the Tars kick off actually this weekend against the Hurricanes in Wellington, and I'm sorry, but in Wellington that's not likely to pull that one off, so I can't see that one happening there. And if we go down, that is the only, oops, that's not the only one, is it? Then the next game against New Zealand opposition is in Sydney on round 11 against the Blues. And again, I think we're going to find a common theme here, is that the Blues are possible teams that could trip up this record, especially away. So again, I think the Blues in Sydney is a possibility that for one of those, for an Australian victory against New Zealand side. And then in round 14, the Waratahs have to go to Dunedin to play the Highlanders under their roof. And I'm sorry, I think again, I mean, the Highlanders are champions from 2 years ago. Yes, they've not been going so great, but I think that's good. You can't really call that one as a likely win for the Australian side. And then their fourth game against New Zealand opposition is they host the Chiefs in the 3rd of June. So that's towards the end of the competition. You maybe get some of the New Zealand sides might be thinking about the Lions, but again, I think that should be a Chiefs win if they don't rest too many players for the away trip. So far we've got 2 games that we think the New Zealand could trip up on. Let's now cross over to the Reds and see who they have got, which New Zealand opposition they're playing. Obviously, they've already played the Crusaders in round 3, and also the Hurricanes in round 6. So they've already got a couple of their games out of the way, so they haven't got many more opportunities to do this. In round 11, the Reds face off against the Chiefs in New Plymouth, so at least they're not in Hamilton, which is the Chiefs' main home. Even so, I can't see the Reds having got their act together in time to win that game. And then in round 15, they have an interesting one where they go to Samoa to play the Blues. So that could be an interesting one. It's just before the Lions tour, so again the Blues may be thinking about resting players for their Lions game, but in all honesty, I think a game in Samoa, the Blues will be fully up for that one, and I think that's going to be a struggle for the Reds. Then in round 17, the Reds get to travel to Dunedin to play the Highlanders. Now, looking at the Highlanders so far on points, they're going to need to win that game. And so again, I think even though the Reds might have got into gear by then, that would be a big ask to go to Dunedin and win that game. So from an Australian point of view, I think there are 2 games where we could see an upset, which is, or not an upset, sorry, the Australian side beating the New Zealand side, and that's both the Brumbies and the Waratahs at home against the Blues. If we go across to South Africa and we have a look at who the Stormers get to face, this weekend they've got the Chiefs, which is going to be a real test and a real sign as to where the Stormers stand. They complained last season that they didn't have enough opposition during the regular season. It hurt them in the playoffs. So this will be a big test, but I'm backing the Chiefs to win that one. The Stormers then travel and play the Crusaders, Highlanders and Hurricanes all in New Zealand. And I think that is going to be a stretch too far for the Stormers on those ones. And South African sides traditionally don't travel very well, and to be taken on those 3 sides is going to be a stretch. After that, they come back from those 3 games and straight away play the Blues at home. So, is that right? Straight away? So they play the 5th of May, and then on the 19th... Oh, no, sorry, they get a week off, have a bye week when they come back home before playing the Blues. So again, I think that's a game that the Stormers would be targeting to win the Blues at Newlands. And I think having had the rest week after their tour, they should be in fine fettle. So whilst a lot of, there is speculation that the New Zealand teams could go through this season undefeated, I think there are 3 games that are eminently winnable by the overseas sides, and I think those are the high risk ones are the Blues against the Stormers, against the Waratahs and against the Brumbies away. So I don't think the New Zealand sides will get through this season undefeated, and in a lot of ways I hope they don't, because you don't really want the tournament to be too lopsided. So that's my opinion on things. Do let me know your thoughts, and if you've liked this, please share it or give it the old thumbs up on YouTube. And also, if you want to see more stuff from me and would like to help support me doing this, then please become a patron. The link's above in Twitter, or it's in the notes down below in YouTube. You can support me from as little as $1 a month, and it would mean the world to me to be able to do more of this for you and support me in that way. Thank you very much for listening. I check out on YouTube the rugby discussion. It's a new series I'm doing with where I discuss a topic with somebody else online. It was a live broadcast today with the Scottish Canon. We talked about the state of Australian rugby. And there's one from last week where we talk about the Super Rugby format. So please go check those out on YouTube. They're a good watch. They're about half an hour, so a bit longer than this stuff, and go in a bit more detail. So have a great weekend. Enjoy what rugby you watch, whatever rugby you're watching, and catch you next week.